That's what
There you go. Good.
okay. So, hello, everybody. This is Carol Roberts, the medical doctor on the Grokking Wholeness team. And I have a special guest with us today, whom I only met very recently, never in person, but we connected on many levels. And Marissa Levine is an MD with a focus on family medicine. She also has been the chief medical officer of the state of Virginia, which relates to her MPH, her master's in public health from Johns Hopkins. And in fact, she graduated medical school from Albert Einstein College of Medicine, where I did my residency training. So we have a lot in common.
Yes.
And we met online at a discussion group that is a spin-off of the Fritjof Capra course in systems thinking. And that's a big chunk to bite off. So I'm going to ask Marissa to jump in here and please to help me explain what that's all about.
Sure. Thanks, Carol. What an honor to be with you. I was so glad our paths crossed, and thank you for the work that you're doing. This has really been a lifelong process for me. And I think looking back, I'd have to say that I'm probably one of those people who likes to see the bigger picture. I don't think I was ever in a reductionist mode. In fact, in medical school, in my fourth year, I was thinking about becoming a geneticist, and I spent 2 months doing fetal medicine research at UCSF in San Francisco. And I enjoyed it, but what was interesting at the time and sad was that my family was going through crisis. My youngest brother, 12 years younger than me, had a disease that put him in the hospital for months, and nobody could figure out what it was. It turned out to be a form of a autoimmune condition. And I just watched how not only did the medical community have difficulties with the disease, but nobody managed the larger picture of the family. And so I was at Albert Einstein College of Medicine, as you mentioned, and they don't produce family doctors there much. At least they didn't when I was there in the early 80s. But I found my path to family medicine, and I realized that it was really congruent with kind of my worldview of seeing the whole person, seeing them in context, because family medicine is seeing the person in context of their family and community. And I really appreciated that. And I ended up in medical practice. And over the course of that practice, I ended up in a teaching opportunity in Erie, Pennsylvania, where I was able to get very involved with the community as a physician. I ran a residency program there and I taught the community medicine part of it. I got very involved in public health and became part of the local board of health. But I also realized at that time that whole concept of the person in context of their family and community, that there were all these factors that influence our health and well-being. And this was well before we talked a lot about the social determinants and other determinants of health. But I realized that as a physician, I could only do so much with my patients. All of these other factors were, if not as important, probably even more important. And so I was fortunate that I was in a leadership position in this healthcare system and initially got what traditionally for administrative roles for physicians would be like MBA type work, business oriented. But all of us who were doing that realized that didn't make any sense in the chaotic environment we worked in. And so we were seeking kind of other ways to approach that. And this was the same time that the new science of complexity started. And I was just in the right place at the right time. I met people nationally who had convened to try to figure out what the complexity science that was evolving could mean in the healthcare space, and particularly for those like myself who were in more administrative roles.
So
It was
can we just talk about complexity theory.
Oh,
What is
sure,
that?
sure.
What does that mean?
So this was the realization that the natural world that we live in um, is not linear. It's for any given effort, we don't necessarily get a proportionate outcome. So, we tend to think, okay, a small effort results in a small change, a large effort results in a large change. That's a linear approach. And what was obvious in my world was that sometimes any effort resulted in no change,
Yeah.
and a big effort just fell on its face and maybe even had a negative impact, right? And there were actually a lot of medical studies that demonstrated that we put all this money and effort into a community intervention, and we don't see anything of significance, or at least nothing that was sustainable. And it just became more and more clear that the complexity science was telling us that the world is nonlinear. These natural systems, including human systems, communities, organizations, families, uh, the connections, the relationships are so complex that we don't know how any one given input is going to result in the outcomes that we see of that. So,
And that's
we
what
could
science wants, isn't it? They
that
want to
science, yeah,
pull on one thread and see what comes out. And we can't do that. It's a whole tapestry.
it
So
is.
we're
Eh,
finally learning that it's not as simple as we thought.
No, but we don't like uncertainty, and complexity science tells us these complex systems can be adaptable, but they can't necessarily be predicted. We don't like that. I mean, we want to predict the weather to more than 2 days, right? And we want to predict disease outbreaks, epidemics. But honestly, we have to step back and say it's always going to be limited in these complex systems. This is what the science of complexity is telling us, but it's helping us to understand some of the intricacies of this. And one of them that was always really of great interest to me was that these complexities that we see, let's take a healthcare system, very complex entity. Um, Sometimes very simple, what people call rules, uh, actually result in very complex outcomes. So rules sometimes could be agreements. They could be um, social norms, the way we operate, the way we act based on what we think is normal in our communities. And so
Can you
when you
give us
start,
an example?
yeah, when we start looking at complex systems, we can step back and say, what might be the simple rules operating that? And I'll just give the example of the educational system. And I don't mean this as a criticism, but more of a reality that the way the educational system, let's just say K through 12, is designed right now, um, we're operating with rules that actually make it more difficult for all children to be educated. And so, because the simple rules are that you must follow the standards, and that if you deviate from the standards, we're going to make sure that you follow the standards, and then we're going to work within our resources. I mean, the problem with that is those rules result in the system that we have, which means that we're not educating all children to the best of our ability to do so. You could come up with similar rules in the healthcare system that relate to profit, um, and safety, but profit actually is a rule that we follow over and above safety. Safety is a set. We like to say patient safety as prime, but honestly, it's more about profit and then the transaction. So that safety is a third component of that. And if you start looking, we're not good at this. If you start looking at systems and try to figure out, well, what are the rules or agreements that operate those systems or that they're operated on, you realize that the opportunity for systems to evolve is to change the rules and the agreements. but you have to make those visible first. You have to bring them to the surface. And too much of how things happen, like in organizations, is cultural. It's the way it's always been. And sometimes people don't even appreciate the rules they're operating under because they're just kind of in the fabric of the system, if you will. So, to your point about consciousness, one of the critical activities we can do is to become aware, to become conscious. And we can do that through asking good questions, asking the why questions, and beginning to understand the relationship of the parts. How do we relate to each other? How does the system relate to other systems? What is the context? Because context is so critical. Um, and when you start to do that, some really good questions come about, and you appreciate that the opportunity to result in better outcomes might be in a different context. And I think for me as a physician, one of the greatest examples was if you really wanted to enhance educational outcomes in the 90s, one of the best ways to do that was to get rid of lead in the environment because you could make the IQ go up significantly by removing lead. Um, and that's just one example of the fact that when you start to think in systems, you realize some of the opportunities for improvement exist in other contexts or other systems. So to me, it just represented so much opportunity, and it got me really interested in what could be done at other levels or and other places. And it got me into the community. It got me into public health. And it also made me realize that policy was a huge driver of health. And this is somebody who never wanted anything to do with politics. I just wanted to take care of patients. I valued the doctor-patient relationship, but it just became so obvious that policy, organizational policy, local policy, state policy, national policy, all of those were huge drivers. And I think that's how I ended up in governmental public health and in my other roles. So I'll stop there and see what
Okay.
comments or questions you want to follow up.
I just want to point out something that I'm sure many of our viewers have seen before, but I think it's apropos. Behind me on the wall is a painting that I did called The Art of Medicine Under Attack. And she is holding up a caduceus, like a crucifix, and she's being attacked by the vulture who represents Big Pharma, the snake who is the standard of care, and the dog, which is the FDA. So
Wow.
government, medicine, there it is. That's how I feel about it. It's pretty dramatic, but I remember when I first heard the term standard of care, and it made my skin crawl. It just sounded wrong because it was going to get in the way of individualized medicine.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. And I talked about context, but if you really think about the art of medicine, it's about taking our wisdom of the practice of medicine and applying it to the context that's relevant for that person, that family, or whatever, that situation. And I have to tell you that when I came out of medical school, I was brain dead in one way. I was so focused on the fact that I needed to know everything. And in family medicine, definitely you can't know everything. But if I wasn't going to be a good doctor, it was because I didn't know everything. And I realized I was a victim of this rote memorization approach that you had to feel guilty if you didn't know everything and you had to keep making sure that you knew everything, but you couldn't. You couldn't possibly know everything. So what we really need is a system of information management to make sure that we can find the information we need and apply it to the context that we're dealing with. And that's the art. But I also realized the the knowledge base of medicine didn't provide all the answers. The answers needed to be developed through the creativity of being aware by working with the people that you're trying to help and understanding them better and then working together on an approach. And that was a very creative thing. So the first time, and this was because of the folks I was working with, I realized, my gosh, I need not only I need to be creative, but I can be creative. And that in a way, medical school had snuffed that out and I needed to find it again. When I did in practice, it was a whole different world. It was like a world of opportunity.
So I would add that everything has to be filtered through the heart
Mm,
because not everybody can take the same treatments in the same way. And we have to be able
absolutely.
to listen carefully to what our patients are saying if we really want to know what's going on with them. What an idea. So you need time and you need the empathy to really get into what they're experiencing and believe them. How about
Yes.
that? There's a
You
context
know,
we don't often offer.
I was fortunate in my residency to have a gentleman scholar running the residency, Dr. Lewis Barnett, who has since passed many years ago. But he was the epitome of what you're talking about because I'll never forget, he said, listen to the patient. He or she will tell you what they need. And I never forgot that because it's powerful. And when you're open to listening, which is really difficult in medical practice, especially now where you're supposed to be more in this machine mode, um, it works. And what I did in medical practice, because we had a teaching practice, so we often had students, the way it would work that really got to help me and the patient was we had a three-part system, the patient, the student, myself in the room, and we were equals. In other words, we could all ask each other questions. It was really impactful, extremely positive. I think it was uplifting to all of us. And I can't tell you how many times I got better insight into what we could do together, what the patient's needs were, and how to best meet them. And I think it was a great educational opportunity for the student. It really goes to your point of listening, asking good questions, but listening. And it's not a lost art, but the system makes it really difficult to do that these days. And I worry with AI if we're going to lose the importance
Getting
of that.
worse. For sure, it's getting worse. But what I hear from patients is that oftentimes they'd rather see the nurse practitioner than the doctor because she has more time and listens better. So, what are we selling here? Are we selling mechanized protocols, or are we dealing in human experiences and human consciousness? Because to me, the most exciting part of dealing with a patient is waking them up to their own power,
Yeah, I love that.
right? We as doctors are the entertainment while the patient does the healing, somebody once said.
Yeah.
And
No, I love that. That's great.
yeah, so if you're entertaining enough and they feel like, you're on their team, but they themselves are made largely responsible for their outcome. Now, I'm talking about chronic illness. I'm not talking
Mhm.
about an automobile accident or a heart attack. That's where conventional medicine shines. But in all chronic illness, we need to look at the whole picture.
Right.
So I'll toss
No,
it.
and I think you mentioned about nurse practitioners. It's interesting because I was just talking to a nurse practitioner colleague of mine. And there's no question that they're a very caring and competent group. And I do think we are at a time where we have to rethink how we collaborate because we want to make sure that there's access everywhere to quality care. And I think we have to get away from the hierarchy that exists and just figure out who can provide the best service in the area and understands the context best to connect. I think that there's always a role for the physician. There's a leadership role, but there's also leadership roles for other practitioners. And we have to get away from this us versus them concept and just say, what's the right thing to do and that it might be different in different places, but let's support it because ultimately we want everybody to be able to connect in that meaningful way. I will say too, you're absolutely right about the current system. It is an acute care responsive system. It really works well for that. Um, and we don't want to give that up, but we are burdened with chronic disease and we're traumatized in so many ways that we need to develop a healing system. And that healing system has to be outside of the hospital. It has to be the community. I've always thought that what we want to produce are health promoting type of communities, that prevention ought to occur where we live, where we work, where we play. And that's a design problem to some degree. We could design our communities, our organizations to be healing, to help us to all thrive. And we just all right now, we just need a little more understanding and we need some will to do that, but it would have a huge payback in terms of well-being and thriving in our communities.
Well, you mentioned the word payback. Payback to whom? So we have ingrained in the system the financial incentive, and the financial incentive works directly against the interests of the patient
Yeah.
because chronic illness is like a subscription model. Keep them coming back, keep them buying medicines, have a medicine for every symptom. Never make them well because then you lose a customer. So maybe I'm very cynical, but I think I'm pretty accurate about this. And you're right, prevention beats rescue, but nobody's doing prevention. And when you talk about it, people look at you like you have three heads. What do you mean? Prevention means I get my mammogram every year. No, honey, the mammogram is radiating the same body part year after year. How does that make sense or prevent anything?
Well,
So,
I think you're absolutely right. We are a transactionally oriented, profit-driven society. I'm not against capitalism, but I come at it from a very different perspective that capitalism was originally designed that if you benefit your society, your community, you will benefit. And what we're seeing is that right now people are benefiting themselves, but not necessarily benefiting society. So to your point, there's a greed there, right? There's a greed in that I'm going to make you dependent. This is another really important issue. We have built dependencies and addictive processes because of greed, honestly. Let's really put it out there.
well,
And there's an unconsciousness, a lack of awareness of that, and it's particularly damaging for young people who are developing, who their brains, minds are developing, and they're being taken advantage of. We're starting to see some effort to try to prevent that, but we have to bring to the surface that we have a society that is based on addictive transactional process, and that's not good for anybody, maybe except for a very small few. So um, this is a political issue too, that it has to rise to the level of being politically important, but we have so much greed throughout. I don't want to get too deep in this now, but even in our current administration, there is a lot of ego-driven greed driving policy decisions. And in my opinion, that's not good for anybody, except maybe a small number. So this is important stuff. And it goes back to what I was saying about policy decisions are really influential in our well-being. And I do hope people's awareness arises to a level of speaking out about what's going on and what they need. And we really have to come together as communities to do this and get past the political division because this is something that affects all of us. It potentially is common ground that we could build off of. And I think
so if
being in
you could,
public health has been important.
if you could redesign the system from the ground up, what would you want included? Just
Well,
stuff.
I think that I had the chance to meet Nora Bateson, and Nora has developed something called the Warm Data Labs. And I was intrigued by this because I've taught leadership for the past 7 years after leaving government service. And the leadership approach that has evolved is called regenerative leadership. It's not my term, but it's really this idea that we're not machines, we're not just cogs in the wheel, we're living beings connected to one another and to the larger ecosystem, and we're dependent upon each other. So we want to make better, more life-affirming decisions that benefit all of us. And we can do that. I really have no doubt about it. Um, what what Nora's done is she has a nice phrase that I like. There's no community without communing. And so I think it starts at a very basic level with people connecting more deeply, maybe in their own neighborhoods, definitely in their own communities, and getting to know one another through stories, because that's how we connect with people. Um, we need to get really good at telling stories, but it's not hard when you just get people in the right framework and put them in a place where there's no necessarily expected outcome other than to connect. And so that's what the warm data labs are. They're opportunities for people to share stories, and they do it in context. So it might be something like this. It might be, um, what is family in a changing world in a political context? What is family in a changing world in an economic context? What is family in a changing world in a health context? And in these labs, it sounds like something sterile, but it's just people convening. You sit in groups of four and you tell stories to each other. And whenever you want to get up and move around, you can, but each four group is a different context. So now you start to kind of begin to think about, well, what am I learning about whatever this issue is in different contexts? Because this is something we don't do. Going back to complexity, we don't think nonlinearly, and we have to develop that skill and capability. So the Warm Data Lab is just one way that we can connect as human beings without worrying about political divides and some larger outcome that we're trying, or problem that we're trying to solve. And you begin to appreciate one another and the importance of the different perspectives and what we can learn by moving across context. She calls that a semathesy. It's mutual learning in context, and it's really powerful. So I think it starts with building community so that we can have the conversations we need to do about the vision we want for our community and the purpose behind that and the principles we're going to operate on. And to me, this is kind of regenerative leadership emerging from community. So I think right now, it's not going to start at the national level. It has to start locally. And it can start with anybody. And I would hope that we could do that generationally too, because we want
Great, I agree.
people have lived experience to hear the youth and for the youth to share their stories and perspectives so that we can really design our communities to be inclusive.
So it makes me think of the World Cafe model,
The
where
World Cafe is similar, but it is
similar. So,
problem oriented or
well,
issue oriented.
yeah, they get together and talk about a certain issue, and then they'll switch tables and talk to a different group,
Right.
and then bring all the ideas kind of together. So I'm seeing this is an organic thing that's coming up from the need. Um, I have a couple who open their home every Thursday evening, and there's no agenda, and people bring food, and everybody sits at a different table and just talks to different people. And they usually get like 10 or 20, no, more than 10, 20 or 30 people. And it's clear that people are hungry for
Yes,
that sort of thing.
that's what I say.
Even though there's no agenda, they know each other. And if something happens, like God forbid, we have a hurricane or some unusual event, like a storm or whatever, people will know each other. They'll know who to go to, who needs what. and they'll be more inclined to come together. I always tell my patients they should have something that they can grow, even if in a window box or if they have a yard, grow onions. Get your neighbor to grow the peppers and then you can trade. So, to kind of bring a
Yeah.
food supply into the community.
I
So,
love it. What you're describing is how we build community. And what we talked about earlier about healing, we know because the literature is ripe with good information that positive social networks are critical to our well-being. And they aid in our healing, especially after issues like having cancer. So it's about bringing to the surface the things that really matter and making them uh, front and center in terms of levels of importance instead of an afterthought, right? And I think that what you're talking about is the exception right now. I'd love for it to be the rule.
well, that's because I'm an Aquarian and I'm always 20 years ahead of everybody. But somebody, we just are visioning a better world, a better system, a more
Absolutely.
workable, more human, more humane way of living. And the old model has to crumble, which I believe it is in the process of doing. And our wrecking ball Shiva in the White House is taking care of that. And meanwhile, we need to be focused on how can we do this better.
Mhm.
So,
I like to say we're trying to avoid the Alice in Wonderland um,
which,
dilemma where, where are you going? I don't know. Any road will take you there. I do think that we can envision that aspired future and then begin, through an appreciative process, figuring out what I liked in that, what are the root causes of success to get there, and then what are the steps we can do now. That's a really positive, engaging approach. And in the leadership work that I've done, we integrated a more appreciative approach, which is incredibly powerful. Because if it's only problem based, it gets into a very negative space. And right now, we need to create these positive fields of energy to engage people, to have hope, to keep hope, to move forward to something that they aspire to, and then to create that shared vision, the shared aspiration, which I think is really powerful. And then it gives us intention to move forward.
so I think we're doing our part. How do we get the younger people involved?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think similar to what we just mentioned, if in places that I visited around the world, when there is formal intergenerational activity, it's incredibly powerful. So it shouldn't just be the exception. Again, it should be the rule. How do we make sure, no matter what we're putting together, we have representation from across. Even, in Florida, there's a lot of age-friendly efforts going in different communities. And what's interesting about that is it doesn't mean it's just for older people. It's how do we create communities that are friendly to all ages? And you can only do that by engaging representatives from all ages to participate. I think the structure of our communities is such that we actually inhibit the involvement of younger people. I used to, when my children were small, I used to drive around the community and we would point to a school and a prison, and I'd say, is this a school or a prison? Is this a school or a prison?
Huh,
It's actually worse now because all the schools do look like prisons.
that's
But
right.
my point is that we lock our children away and we don't include them in the decision making, in the information. And that's a shame because we need that perspective. We should be creating our communities for our next generation and even beyond. So I think we have to be intentional about it. And I think it's going to take people in leadership positions in all of these different sectors, local government, education, business, to be very intentional about including children in the process and youth and even young adults. The more, the better, and we'll all benefit from that.
And also including children in our daily lives. And because we silo generations.
we do.
And we put our old people in warehouses
That's right.
and put our kids in prisons. And is there any wonder that they're all anxious and they can't think straight? Not to mention the food and the toxins and all of that. But they
Right.
don't have grounding in the older generations, many of them. Some lucky ones do, and the older people don't have the benefit of being able to pass on their wisdom.
Exactly. Exactly. No, I think there's so much opportunity, and I would love for us to instill in not only each other, but in our young people a sense of awe and discovery, because we don't want people to think that everything we need to know we already know and you just have to learn it like I did in medical school, but that there's such an opportunity to not only become more aware, but discover and be in awe of that process of discovery. To me, that's what learning is all about. And that's what our educational system should instill. And instead of rote memorization and, here's what you need to know. Um, because,
So
you and I, we can think back to medical school, whatever we learned is probably archaic now, right? So it's not so much about knowing that, it's about learning how to learn and be open to be a lifelong learner and understanding how to interface with information and ask really good questions and then find the answers that you need in the context. So,
and then
that,
interface with the human being that is at the center of the inquiry.
absolutely.
AI can't do that. I mean, we can find a lot of answers on our phone. We've got apps for this and that and whatnot. And so it's less important to rote memorize, although you have to know where to look.
Yeah.
But what we can't get from a machine is that human interface.
Right. It's a tool. I mean, I love technology because it provides us important tools. You have to appreciate its limitations. And then I think there has to be a transparency. I can remember in the early days of technology, I would bring information into the exam room with me, show it to the patient, and we would learn together how this was applicable to their situation. And they really appreciated that because that's, to me, that's joint decision making right there.
Mhm. Exactly. So tell me more about regenerative leadership. I'm still not sure what that is.
Sure. There's no magic here. It's really a lot of what we've heard about before. It's a mindset shift, if you will, building awareness that we're not machines, even though we've created a society believed that where we believe that to be the case, not just cogs in the wheel. Um, we're living beings. So the first step is, can we appreciate what it means to be alive? And this is where Fritjof Capra has really helped um, because one of the key things he's taught me is that all life is networked. So what does that mean? It's connected. From a physician's point of view, our body is a series of networks interfacing with one another with lots of feedback loops, some positive, some reinforce whatever it is that's going on, some balance it out. And it keeps us as a body in homeostasis, which is not stagnancy, it's an ability to adapt to whatever might be happening around us. Um, so the networking is really critical, and a lot of businesses have already figured it out. That's what agile organizations are all about: is building more robust networks of people that can adapt to the circumstance and get away from the hierarchy so much. Um, and then what is it about life that's different from non-life? Well, we can regenerate. We take in energy. We take in, air, food, water, and
Light.
our bodies and light. Our bodies use that to help us continue to advance, to grow, and maybe even be better. In fact, we grow through stress provided the stress doesn't kill us. We are better off as a result because of our ability to regenerate. So you have to ask the question then, what are the conditions in which we regenerate? I think that's a really important question for people like me to be asking. Um, and then part of that is, well, all life is intelligent. It uses what it knows from its past to apply to its current situation. And then it's creative. And all of evolution has been about creativity. Let's try different combinations and see what works the best, so to speak. So those are kind of fundamental principles: networks, regeneration, creativity, and intelligence. And those are all critical to this idea of being a regenerative leader. But the regenerative leader is not the hero leader that we know of. Um, often the white male riding in on the horse, solving the problem of the day or having all the answers, that served a purpose.
Mhm.
And um, we're in a time, because of the complexity, where we actually need collaborative leadership. We need lots of different perspectives. And so a person who wants to be a regenerative leader has to do the inner work to be able to come to a relationship from a place of respect, to be trustworthy, and to be open to learning, i.e., humble, not bringing hubris, to be humble. Because as Brene Brown says, humility is about being open to learning. And I think that's a beautiful way of thinking it. And it's not a vulnerability, it's not a negative in a leadership role. There's a competent humility Adam Grant talks about. And I like that because we want people who are competent in their field, but you have to be humble enough to know you don't know everything, you can't know everything, and you're open. So I see the regenerative leader as somebody who's willing to do the inner work, to do the reflective work, to, like our indigenous wisdom tells us, come from a place of respect before you connect with people. And then once you connect, to appreciate that has done something, hopefully positive. And it requires you to reflect on it. How did I change? What did I learn from that interaction? Before you start telling people what to do. And in medicine and public health, we're really good at telling people what to do, but we haven't done the groundwork. So the regenerative leader will come into those relationships from a place that's more likely to build what are called generative relationships, where both parties are better off. And then when we do that and come together, we start to talk about shared vision, shared purpose, shared principles that we'll operate on, building off of our own. And we start to learn collaboratively. We start to act collaboratively. And then we appreciate, because we're in complex environments, that we have to do that iteratively. We have to be good at sustaining our collective learning and action. It's not easy. But what we're trying to do is come at it from a place of a living being, appreciating the importance of those connections, the networking that sustains us, and then create the conditions, create systems that help us regenerate. And for human systems, that's, steeped in caring, love, um, clean water, clean air, supporting our environment, building organizations where there's joy in what we do, where we're not advancing our productivity on somebody's back, so to speak, and that we begin to create those same conditions in our communities to sustain it for not only the next generation, but generations to come. So I think it's about bringing balance back into the system. And also, I love this indigenous approach. It's being in right relation and healing self and systems. Ultimately, that's what it's all about. And it's very powerful, and it's about taking that positive view of the future that we want and appreciating that we have to do it together.
Ex-
So I know that's a long-winded
No,
answer,
that was
but it's a real
beautifully,
opportunity.
beautifully articulated. I would add that we want to be mindful of the seventh generation, that our
Absolutely.
actions have consequences. And what you are describing makes me think of the yin yang aspect. We're coming into balance because we're bringing the feminine model of cooperative work,
Exactly. Exactly.
whereas the masculine model has its place, but it's a hierarchical model. And it's the boss guy who tells everybody what to
Yeah.
do. And that doesn't work anymore. we've
Well,
come
we
to
need
the,
balance. We're out of balance, right?
yes,
So we
yes,
need
we
balance.
sure are. So we have to swing back a bit in the other direction, a lot in the other direction, but keep the parts that work. So I don't want a committee trying to fly my airplane. Right? I
Well,
want,
no, and I'm talking about complex situations, complex environments, because there are things that we know how to do well, we should keep doing, and we should not try to be complex in a less complex context, right? We don't have to be the kind of regenerative leaders for things that we already do well, that we know how to do. So we're really not throwing out those things. We're appreciating there's a difference when you start talking in this great complexity we have. And there's a great opportunity. That's what gets me. We have unbelievable opportunity to help all thrive. And when I say all, I don't just mean people, I mean the whole ecosystem.
okay.
We could do it. We just have to have the will.
Well, okay, let's say we have the will. And what you suggest is that we start locally and that we build our networks among our neighbors, our family, our friends, our people that we purchase goods from, the people that we come in contact with.
Exactly.
And then we have to then interface with government and with other towns and cities. Like it's tribes coming together in a new way. We have forgotten how to do that.
Yeah, no, we live in a world that has separated us. People call it the journey of separation. And so we have to learn how to reconnect and appreciate why that matters. I don't think everybody has to do everything. I think each of us, through that introspection, can figure out what the best use of our life's energy is. And it may be as simple as every interaction with people in your community, be positive. Do your part of that relationship. Smile. I was amazed when I first did this in practice. I didn't realize, but when I just came with a smile, with a kind face into the exam room, it was like a different world. I was I was open to sharing and to hearing, to listening, and the interaction changed dramatically. So you never know how you're going to affect somebody else's day by just you're doing your part of the interaction. That's what I mean about these generative relationships. I can't control what's on the other side, but I can control how I approach it.
Exactly.
And each of us have the opportunity to do that.
Okay, so if you were the Secretary of Health and Human Services, um, where would you start? Hard to say. Where would
Well, yeah, it's a big mess right now, honestly, and it's a shame. I think that what I'm seeing right now at the federal level is this false concept that health is really just the result of what we do to ourselves or what we don't do for ourselves. So we have to really get back to the appreciation of um, what does determine our health and well-being, and that it's bigger than all of us. So we have to have systems that are supportive, that that we work to redesign, and that aren't based just on profit or transaction. That's a big, big chore, and it's not going to happen quickly, but we have to start by just putting it out there. The challenge is that the political systems, um, because of this change, this seesawing, we have one administration who does it one way and one who does it another way. So I think the effort is to really, it's an educational one, to help people appreciate that in a way that makes sense to them. And that's where I think stories come in,
you?
because stories are powerful. And I can tell you, in public health, we did not do this very well. We have a lot to learn about how to tell stories that are engaging and educational. And just like what I said about lead, focusing on lead as being an educational opportunity, I think that we can tell stories in many venues that get the point across. And I know in some countries, they've integrated stories into media, so TV, radio, movies, in a way, an intentional way to really make the point that here are the things that you can do, or here are the things that really determine your health and your well-being. I think those are really powerful, but we haven't thought much that way. We think of it as something mechanical, right? And so this is where, to me, the arts are really important, and we have to give them the position that they deserve. And we have to start getting creative about education in general, because I think education is that foundational piece. So for me, educating ourselves about health and well-being and making thriving the focus, the goal, if you will, for all, the critical part of it. And when we had this political move to get rid of DEI, we missed the boat that, whether you like that or not isn't the issue, that diversity is important for our sustainability and advancement in complex environments. Uh, we want equitable thriving. There's really no reason. I mean, I'm a public health person. It's always about equitable thriving, and we shouldn't throw out that concept. And we need inclusion. We just talked about intergenerational inclusion as an example, but we know that economies that are inclusive result in better countries, but they need an inclusive politics to support them. And both of those are really critical to inclusive, equitable health outcomes. So we've got to work in all those spaces. And everybody in those spaces needs education. It's not good enough to say, this is not my arena. What do I need to do? And I can tell you, we started to do that in Virginia when I was there. We started to help people, everybody see that they have a role in the health and well-being of the people in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And it was powerful.
So you told a story, a new story to
We
them?
started to, yeah, we did. We created a plan. It was called the Virginia Plan for Well-being, and it was built on pillars. The story was that we used a tree metaphor. So the story was that the roots of the tree are like the social environment, the social soil, if you will, that needed to be cultivated. And it was one of connection, that we needed to work together. And the trunk of the tree represented a strong start for children, because we wanted all children to have the best start possible. And that's what led to our ability to be healthy and well, our ability to be strong and resilient in so many other ways. And so we had four pillars, if you will, that were represented by branches of the tree. And then we talked about what everybody can do in their arena to impact this overarching well-being tree of Virginia, which was the Commonwealth. The branches were in the shape of the state, which was kind of cool. And it was fun to see work happening at the local regional levels, at the state level, and the beginnings of alignment. And it would have been nice for that to continue in earnest, but with the political winds changing, a lot of these things don't continue. But that's what we need. So we need it to happen at the behest of the citizens of the community so that it continues.
They need to know that they deserve better than what they're
And we
getting.
can have better. We
We
can. There's
can.
no reason. I mean, we have the resources. Again, we think we're in a state of scarcity, but we're not. So that's a mindset shift. And there's certainly an abundance of ideas, creativity, innovation, um, and perspectives, which I think is really important. And we have the technology, quite frankly, to help us too. So there's really no reason that we can't do better. But I think I'll say this: we have to get past the idea, the fear, the fear of living, that the concept of survival of the fittest is not right. That's not what Darwin intended. Um, and we can't be afraid of living, and we can't we can't believe that I'm only going to be better at the cost of you not being better. Uh, it's not there's plenty of pie, and if we work together, I really believe we can do better for all. But there's an ingrained fear that some use politically to their advantage, and we have to get past that. We really have to appreciate that that's not the world that it needs to be. The war mentality needs to go away. And unfortunately, talking about money and greed, there's way too much money in promoting war and the war components. And I really worry about that as a public health person.
Yeah, I don't think real people are interested in going to war for virtually
Nobody in
any.
their right mind would be.
No. And this is a pathological aspect of our culture, as is the power that corporations are wielding now. The corporations stop any kind of innovation in healthcare that is not going to bring in big bucks. They discredit people, they throw away research, they, who knows? I mean, they do even worse. And many, many cures for cancer have come around, and nobody knows about them today because their inventors were wound up in an insane asylum. So
Wow.
we do have the resources, we have the knowledge, but we do not yet have the will. Um, so
Carol, I think we've abdicated a lot of power to a very small number of people. And I would like us to collectively rethink about how we can regain the people power.
well,
And I
but one
think,
thing I've read about is just don't buy anything that you don't absolutely have to for a while. And I think they were saying from today or tomorrow to November 3rd or 4th for the next few days, just don't buy anything extra. And if more enough people do that, we will definitely make a point, as
well, I
well as
also
be
heard,
on the street.
with us on the brink of SNAP benefits being cut, that first of all, there actually is money to support SNAP benefits continuing, even with the government shutdown. There have already been contingencies. So shame on our representatives for not utilizing that. I hope they do. Um, and that we just have the ability to do so much better. Um, and it's a shame that we've abdicated that power to those folks. So I think we really could rethink this and begin to maybe use this as the opportunity. Why not now to really rethink what a better political system might look like? I do think that corporations uh, are run by people who benefit, but corporations are also made up of a large number of people. Um, Government's made up of a large number of people, and we've silenced those voices for lots of reasons. And I understand the fear factors there, having worked in government, but it's not right anymore for people who are in those situations to be silenced because they know better and they can be informative. And we have to be more protective of getting the truth out about things because I think that's what has to happen now.
In every walk of life. I mean, I'm
Every
thinking
walk of
about
life.
regenerative in terms of agriculture. We have monocropping in millions of acres of land in this country, and that is not an organic way to produce food. It's not safe, it's not good for the soil, and on and on and on. And farmers are beginning to want to change to a more regenerative
Yeah.
model. But it's going to take money and it's going to take government support to do that. Meanwhile, we're supporting corn and soy, and and that's why those are cheap, and we're feeding it to our cattle and our meat animals, and we're getting sicker and sicker. So the will has to be there, the education has to be there, and the people have to stand up for themselves.
I think so. I think that's what how a democracy survives. And to your point about consciousness, I hope that all of us can become more conscious of what's happening in our own spheres and translate that into actions that can make a difference because we can't keep going on with the way it is now. And we have the opportunity to do better. I think that's what gives me hope is there's plenty of opportunity. And why not now? Now is the time.
So, yeah, okay, if people would want to jump on board with something like this, what would you have them do?
Well, I think if they're in a place where they have a leadership role, they can. There are a couple of really good books that can start them off. Carol Sanford uses indigenous wisdom, and she wrote the book called The Regenerative Life, which I think is really impactful in a practical way. Um, there was a book also about regenerative leadership. There were a couple of books about regenerative leadership. There's more that's out there and coming, but I would say to your readers and listeners, you're more than happy to reach out to me. You're welcome to do that. I have a website, envisionwellbeing.org, and I put a lot of resource there, including my own blog called A Better Way, um, because I think that we have the need to emerge better leadership. And it's not rocket science here. So I'm willing to help or guide anybody who's of interest. And I think this is relevant not just in the health space or public health space, everywhere. You brought up agriculture. There are a number of regenerative farmers out there, and they're leaders. They are doing exactly that. There's regenerative business and economy thinking people who are basically helping us appreciate that we need a different economic system, or at least a different economic metaphor, if you will, than this idea that we can have growth sustained over and over and over at all costs. So it's happening, it's building, and I would be more than happy to assist anybody or direct them to other resources.
So let me just repeat this. Your website is envisionwellbeing.org, and they can
Exactly.
contact you
There's
through that.
contact information there and lots of resource.
Fantastic. Well, you've certainly given me a lot to think about
Well,
and
thank you. I'm
fired me
glad.
up some more. And I hope we continue this conversation in
Yeah, let's
many
do it again.
forums and can do this again. So I want to thank you for your time and your expertise and all the enthusiasm that you're bringing to this project. So
Thank you.
thank you,
And I
Marissa.
really appreciate the opportunity too. So keep up the good work, Carol.
Well, we're trying. We're out there.
All
Okay.
right. Take good
Thank you
care.
so much. Have a wonderful
Bye-bye.
day. Bye
You
now.
too.
And to our listeners, if you would just like, subscribe, and send us your comments. Grokking Wholeness is our YouTube channel. You need to be signed in order to subscribe. So have a happy Halloween, not too much, and be safe, everybody.